Mr. Agnihotri, your movie, The Kashmir Files, were based on a genocide that took place in the 90s, where you believe that a certain ideology was the reason behind what we saw. So I'm asking you, today many people are drawing parallels with what happened in the 90s. Are the killings part of, therefore, an uncompromising Islamist outlook, an ideology that wants to cleanse the value of all minorities at a time when the government is committed to resettlement?
Thank you, Rahul, and I'm really glad that I'm talking to a gentleman like Salman Khurshid-ji. See, this whole problem began in early 80s or mid 80s, I would say. One of the senior most journalists, one of the most respected journalists with credentials, who is also a very good friend of Mr. Khurshid, he was traveling with Rajiv Gandhi in an aircraft. And when he pointed out to him that so many killings of Hindus are taking place and there is almost no administration, why don't you interfere? And he said, but Abdullah Sahab is my friend, how can I interfere? He will feel bad. This is on records, and I'm not saying that, this is on records in books also. So it all began from taking this friendly approach towards people who were involved with terrorism. Whoever I spoke to, including lots of Kashmiri Muslim people, they were very unhappy that Yasin Malik was invited to Manmohan Singh's office and they were shaking hands. They were very unhappy that a lot of people who are Congress leaders, they go to Hurriyat leaders' houses and appease them. I think this entire vote bank politics of Congress to appease Muslim vote bank in India and therefore keeping quiet on terrorism, I think that has damaged India beyond repair, and it's a very difficult task for anybody. It's like you burn a house and then you get few buckets and say, why don't you putting off the fire? I think that in Kashmir issue, Pakistan, a lot of international lobbies, a lot of terror organizations formed a nexus, and Congress gave them fuel, gave them ideological support. Even till date, I'm in UK, and the other day their leader Rahul Gandhi was in Cambridge, and all the places where I'm going, he has been there. Hindu community is very upset with him because he is drawing the line of India's enemies, and they are still giving ideological support to terror organizations. I want Mr. Khurshid to tell me why your party does not speak against terrorism. Why don't you call these people out? Why do you, first you call them out, first you say you are absolutely against Yasin Malik, JKLF and all these terror organizations. First you call out that the bank manager who was killed yesterday was killed because of Islamic terrorism. You call out that Ralif Galif Shalif was a radical religious terrorism. You say that in so many words, only after that one can have any kind of debate.
Mr. Khurshid, would you describe the spate of targeted killings of Hindus in the valley as an outcome of an uncompromising Islamist jihad being waged against a minority there just because of their identity? And it is led by the Maliks, the Burhanwanis, the Maliks who the Congress has also courted quite evidently in the past, engaged in the past as stakeholders. Would you concede that point?
Well, let me just set the rules of the game straight first. I think it's important. Let me acknowledge that Vivek Agnihotri has done what I believe is a far-reaching effort to speak the truth, and to the extent that he has done that, let me say categorically on behalf of the party, let me say it on behalf of everyone who has a concern about what is going on in Kashmir and what is happening in Kashmir. Let me say categorically that we see no reason to be even remotely empathetic or sympathetic to the heinous crimes that are being committed in whichever name it may be. Now, the fact if someone uses Islam to commit that crime does not make me or force me or persuade me to put up a position and a statement against Islam. Be very clear. I am against the person who misuses Islam. So be categorically clear, that's one thing. Secondly, to say that whatever happened because of Congress soft ideology, I must say that for someone with the kind of foresight an artist and a filmmaker must have, he must be careful with what he says today, lest tomorrow the people he celebrates end up talking to somebody to put an end to the strife. We always talk to the enemy to put an end to the strife. The Americans talk to the Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. Everybody talks, and everyone is talking about setting a table so that Ukraine and Russia can speak. Now, let us not reduce things to a ridiculous level. But we may have made mistakes, and the mistakes are being made now. Now, to say that what is happening today is on the basis of an uncompromised Islamist strategy or an Islamist point of view, I reject completely. I don't care about what they label themselves as, but I do believe that Islam has no place in this, and if they are misusing Islam, they must be called out for that, and Mr. Agnihotri and I should both be calling them out rather than creating empathy or sympathy for them by taking divisive positions and by attacking Rahul Gandhi. I think this is not to reduce what is a very significant, important, grave challenge to India's sovereignty. Don't reduce it to the level of political, allegations against one person or another person. Let's keep this in a serious level and a serious debate. I believe, let me just say this, I believe what is happening today is part of a strategy that is being used against the strategy that we in the government of the country today tried to use to sort out what we believe was an unending problem in Kashmir. They are using a strategy, the enemy is using a strategy, we use a strategy. Now, whether we have to rethink our strategy, because the enemy can't be persuaded by us to rethink the strategy, unless we are able to persuade the enemy by force, by persuasion, by anything else. But my request is, let's keep this at an intellectual level. Let us not bring it down to screaming and shouting about who's to blame and who's not to blame. India is important. India's sovereignty is important. Nobody else matters. Let's be very clear. Let's be very clear. Every single citizen who is loyal to India in Jammu and Kashmir must be protected, irrespective of whether they are Hindu, Muslim, Sikh or Christian.